In 1776, the Royal Navy had a tenfold advantage over the fledgling United States Navy, which often had to supplement its numbers by using privateers or the small state navies. Given the disparity in power, you were a brave man indeed to serve in those early years in the United States Navy. But one of those early sailors had accomplishments that might have risen above all the rest, even though he's barely remembered today. At one point, everybody in the United Kingdom feared Gustavus Conyngham, the famed Dunkirk Pirate. Because don't all good stories involve pirates? Gustavus Conyngham was born in 1747 to a prominent family in Donegal, Ireland. He and his parents moved to Philadelphia in 1763 when he was 16, where he joined his cousin's shipping company, becoming an apprentice to a Captain Henderson. After Henderson's death, Conyngham was given command of the ship. By 1775, he was married with children and prosperous, but the war complicated matters. The shipping company sided with the Patriots, sending Gustavus off on the Charming Peggy to obtain, according to Mark Hay's Sea Raiders of the American Revolution, saltpeter, clothing, muskets, and other munitions. Peggy embarked in the fall of 1775, and according to a letter from Conyngham, arrived at Dunkirk after a circuitous route. Here we could not accomplish in any way our object. His first adventures seem to be somewhat muddled. In the article America's Unwitting Pirate in the journal Coriolis, Lewis Arthur Norton says that Peggy arrived at Dunkirk on November 11th, moored near a British transport. They had to secretly load their munitions, but jettisoned it when the British crew became suspicious and demanded that the French search the vessel. At least once after they left Dunkirk, the Peggy was seized by a British ship in the Channel, but Conyngham and his crew overthrew the British prize crew. According to Conyngham, the ship first put on board our vessel munitions at Newport in Belgium, when an Irishman sailor on board, by the name of Breckenridge, deserted and got to Ostend and informed the British consul. The Coriolis article suggests that this was a second capture and they again overthrew their jailers. Whatever the sequence, sources agree that Peggy was not suitable to escape the region and that Conyngham sold the ship in the hopes that the proceeds could be used to buy another ship. Unfortunately, due to corruption, as Conyngham put it, he never saw any of the proceeds. Conyngham was trapped in Europe without a ship. He had some good fortune, however. American commissioners, including Benjamin Franklin, arrived in France in 1776, and Conyngham was introduced to them. Commissioners had a number of goals, one of which was to outfit ships in Europe to attack British shipping in a strategy of asymmetrical warfare. The hope was to raise insurance rates, hurt British morale, and distract the Royal Navy. Franklin was apparently impressed with Conyngham and gave him a commission in the Continental Navy. Dated March 1st, 1777, he was made commander of the ship Surprise. Surprise was originally a merchant ship, the Peacock. The ship was a fast cutter of about 100 tons. The ship itself was owned privately by Silas Deane, one of the American commissioners in France, and William Hodge. Though private in ownership, Conyngham seems to have believed that he served in the Continental Navy and not as a privateer. In addition to his commission, Conyngham said his men were governed by the regulations made for seamen in the Continental Service. In a narrative he wrote in 1779, he said that he went on a cruise under my former commission, U.S. Navy, and one of his lieutenants wrote that he believed that he had served on a continental vessel. The British called any American commerce raider in the war a pirate. Whether Conyngham was a part of the Navy or a privateer would be a matter of contention for years after the war. While Conyngham seems always to have thought himself a member of the Navy, others, including Americans, often referred to him as a privateer. The Surprise was crewed largely by American sailors detained in the ports of France and Belgium, along with some foreigners, but no Frenchmen at the request of the French Prime Minister. Instructions from American Commissioner William Carmichael said that Conyngham should not cruise the commerce of England, and told him to deliver dispatches to the United States. Conyngham seems to either have immediately disregarded that instruction or his real instructions were more unofficial. In May of 1777, he began cruising the Channel from Dunkirk. Dunkirk was possibly the worst possible port to act out of. As a center for French privateering for centuries, and specifically in wars against Britain, the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713 had barred France from outfitting privateers from the port, and British observers were in place to ensure France complied. Subsequent treaties, including the 1763 Treaty of Paris that ended the 7 Years' War, emphasized earlier treaties and barred the French from fortifying the port. Conyngham nonetheless shortly made his first capture, the British mail packet Prince of Orange. Aware that the ship might carry valuable intelligence, he put a prize crew on the ship, He passed off the captured British to a Dutch fishing ship, making sure to return their possessions, and even fired a 3-gun salute as they departed. On his return to Dunkirk, he also captured the brig Joseph, carrying wine and fruit. When he arrived in Dunkirk, 2 British Navy ketches intercepted him. Unwilling to shoot first, they began deliberately colliding with the Surprise and Prince of Orange, but Conyngham refused to take the bait, instead choosing to press for compensation from the British later. His actions set off a firestorm. The British sent the 18-gun sloop HMS Ceres to trap him in the port, and the French, not yet interested in joining the war, seized the Surprise and Cunningham's commission papers, arresting the crew and released the prizes. Franklin called Cunningham's choice to return to Dunkirk imprudent. His actions, however, were important. The capture of British ships by an American in the British Channel sent shockwaves through the British public. Silas Deane wrote that Cunningham's first adventure greatly raised insurance on the northern trade, and the Maryland Gazette and Political Intelligencer reported that a British merchant had paid a 10% insurance rate thanks to our privateers and cruisers in the Channel. At least 5 British warships had to be detailed to hunt the Surprise after the capture of Prince of Orange. A new commission was quickly obtained, dated May 2, 1777, that recertified him as a captain in the Continental Navy. The British wanted to extradite and try Conyngham, but Benjamin Franklin was able to arrange his release. The Surprise, however, was no longer an option, so the Americans sought a new ship. It was not a simple task, as the British were on high alert to stop any scheme to arm Americans in Europe. Hodge purchased another cutter, the Greyhound, and began arming it. The British were immediately incensed at the Americans arming a ship in a neutral port, and the French pressed the Americans for a promise that the ship would not be used in raiding. Instead, Hodge resorted to a ploy. According to the paperwork, Surprise was sold to a French woman, and Greyhound was sold to an Englishman named Richard Allen. Allen renamed the ship Pegasus, but as Norton puts it, when the ship left the harbor, Richard Allen miraculously became Gustavus Conyngham. The ship was immediately renamed the Revenge. Again, Conyngham believed he was an American officer, and the Revenge a ship of the Continental Navy. It was a fast ship, armed with 14 cannon and 22 swivel guns. Much of the crew had also served on the Surprise, with new opportunistic men hired from around the port. On July 15th, Gustavus was given orders to sail for the U.S., and only to take prizes if he was low on provisions or was attacked first. On July 18th, the Revenge fled a British warship, which opened fire on them. When he allowed several British ships to pass unmolested in the North Sea, his crew, made up of many people who hoped to get rich in raiding, pressured him to begin taking prizes. Citing the attack by the British ship, Conyngham began raiding. On July 20th, he captured a Scottish smuggler, seized its cargo of gin, and sank the ship. He then captured 3 more ships in quick succession. For one, he demanded a ransom to be paid directly to the American commissioners in Paris. Conyngham sailed north around Scotland and found the waters empty, already spooked by Lambert Wickes, another American captain. He captured a whaling brig on August 4th off of Ireland. He meant to sail for the U.S. or the West Indies, but the ship was badly damaged by a gale, forcing him to instead find a European port. He chose El Ferrol, Spain, and captured another British brig on the way. In Dunkirk, Hodge was arrested. Deane complained that despite his success, Conyngham embarrassed us because of his connections to the American commissioners. One captured ship, Northampton, meant to sail to Spain, instead sailed for England, where the prize crew accused Conyngham of being a pirate and turned the ship back over to the British. In England, Conyngham became the Dunkirk Pirate. For the next several months, Conyngham operated out of Spain, where he was permitted to sell prizes and refit. At one point, Spanish forces even seized a deserter from a British ship by force. Cunningham's exploits caused waves in the British press and had serious consequences as well. Insurance rates for maritime trade increased by 28%, according to Norton, and higher than any time during the global conflict of the 7 Years' War, according to Hayes. British merchants begged officials to stop the piracy, publishing advertisements that American privateers would prove ruinous to the commercial interests of the kingdom. Silas Deane reported in August of 1777 that he'd heard that Conyngham had taken or destroyed about 20 sail and appeared off the town of Lynn and threatened to burn it. Conyngham, he said, by his first and second bold expeditions, is becoming the terror of all the eastern coast of England. In December, he captured a French ship, Graciosa, carrying British cargo, eventually deciding to send the ship to port with a prize crew to sell the British goods. The Spanish arrested the prize crew on their arrival in port. It caused a political rift, and Conyngham was ordered to drop the claim on the goods. Dean wrote to Conyngham that every such adventure gives our enemies advantage against us by representing us as persons who regard not the laws of nations. Conyngham countered that the British routinely seized American cargoes from neutral ships. He left Spain in March of 1778 for Martinique, but after capturing several ships, decided to try his luck in the Strait of Gibraltar, where he captured the 16-gun Hope. Conyngham was told in May that the ship was allowed to refit in Corunna, but to leave immediately after. Taking advantage, some of the crew threatened to desert if they weren't paid their share of prize money, and Conyngham was forced to comply. On May 20th, after leaving Spain, he captured a Swedish ship, Enrica Sophia, carrying British goods, but not military ones. He intended to let it go, but faced a near mutiny from the less scrupulous crew, forcing him to take the ship. Sweden protested to the French, as they had no relations with the United States, and the seizures did finally get him barred from Spanish ports. The commissioners promised retribution and repudiated the capture. Conyngham finally left Europe, landing at Martinique in the fall of 1778. There he received new orders to raid British commerce there. On November 13th, he captured 4 ships in a single day, including a British privateer. A Boston newspaper also reported that Conyngham had an engagement off Barbados with a King's cutter of 28 guns, which he pursued near the guns of the fort, and which would not have escaped had it not been for a high sea which prevented his boarding her. In February of that year, the French had officially entered the war against Britain, and for a time Conyngham worked in conjunction with the French fleet in the Caribbean. In February 1779, he sailed for the United States with a supply of arms, arriving in Philadelphia on February 21st. There, Conyngham faced accusations from the crew of misconduct, especially the timely distribution of prize money. Both Hodge and Dean were facing similar accusations. The Congress found the situation too complicated to deal with during the war and sold revenge on March 12th. Arthur Lee had accused Dean of financial improprieties, and Conyngham became a target by association. Conyngham retained his commission and remained captain of Revenge. Unfortunately, though, his luck ran out. Conyngham pursued 2 British privateers on April 27, 1779, and was led directly to HMS Galicia. Galicia, a 20-gun Sphinx-class ship, captured Revenge and the crew. Gustavus was kept in heavy irons the entire time and complained that he had only a cold plank as my bed, a stone for my pillow. He lost 50 pounds while imprisoned by the British in New York and was told that he would be executed as a common criminal. He wrote to his wife that he had, in part, lost my health and cannot live long in this manner. His wife pressed authorities in the U.S., such as John Jay, to obtain his release. Franklin had written in 1777 that if the British treated American prisoners badly, reprisals may be thought justifiable. Cunningham's Sea Captains Club in the U.S. protested his treatment directly to Congress, and Congress ordered a British officer, Lieutenant Christopher Haley, to be confined in the same conditions as Conyngham. This, along with the efforts by Franklin, apparently convinced the British to relent, and he was sent to Mill Prison in Plymouth, rated as an exchangeable prisoner of war. The treatment was still bad, however. Franklin himself wrote that he wanted Conyngham supplied with necessities and volunteered to pay the cost himself. Conyngham was unwilling to wait to be traded. He tried to escape several times, once walking out of the prison in the guise of a prison doctor. Finally, on November 3, 1779, he escaped with around 50 other prisoners. Accounts differ, but they agree that the men escaped by digging under the prison wall. He escaped to Holland, where he offered his service to John Paul Jones. He sailed briefly with Jones before heading back to America aboard a merchant ship. The ship was unfortunately captured before it reached the U.S., and he was again held at Mill Prison. He was exchanged in June 1781 and finally returned to the U.S. later that year. Conyngham spent years trying to get his rank and position in the Navy recognized, hoping for payment for his captured prizes and back pay. He claimed he had never taken orders from private parties and claimed that members of Congress assured him that it was sufficient to entitle me as expressed an officer in the American Navy. The government refused to recognize his service, claiming that the commissions in Europe were only temporary and did not bestow permanent rank. Conyngham believed that Arthur Lee continued to sabotage him, personally overseeing every difficulty thrown my way of a settlement. Neither Surprise nor Revenge ever seemed to have been issued a letter of marque, but neither one was ever listed in the register of the Navy either. In a 1778 letter, Hodge insisted that Revenge was his ship and that the commissioners could not give Conyngham his future orders without my consent. Franklin did write a letter of support confirming Cunningham's commission, but it meant little. He never gave up trying to earn official recognition and even sailed during the Quasi-War with France. He died in 1819. Cunningham's position was complex. His early cruises were operating under what was possibly a temporary commission. He was sailing in boats that were privately owned and out of a port that was neutral. and yet he still certainly served the American cause. He's generally credited with capturing or sinking around 60 vessels, making him one of the most successful of the captains of the Revolution. His own correspondence makes it clear that he always believed that he was operating as an officer of the United States Navy and never as a privateer. And despite his exemplary service, he has become something of an obscure figure. It took more than a century before his original commission, which had been seized by the French, was rediscovered. Still, he's not been entirely forgotten. The town of Conyngham, Pennsylvania, is named after him, as have been 3 United States Navy destroyers. I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of The History Guy, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and share The History Guy with your friends. And if you also believe that history deserves to be remembered, then you can support The History Guy as a member on YouTube, a supporter on our community at Locals, or as a patron on Patreon. You can also check out our great merchandise shop or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo.